Well, your next guest here at the Milken Global Conference is one of the world's big thinkers. His books and articles may make you agree. They may make you question something, or they might even make you angry, but they always make you think. And his latest thesis is no exception. He writes that in some ways, the Trump administration now is a little bit like when COVID hit, at least when it comes to a disruption. Niall Ferguson, Sir Neal now, is senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, a founder of the University of Austin, and recently knighted Sir Neal.
Sullivan,
Right. In my mind, every night I am, but then I wake up. How is, not the medical side, obviously, I want to make that clear, but how is Trump 25 like the early days of COVID as it pertains to the economy?
So let me just make clear, I want President Trump's second administration to succeed. I would have been distinctly unhappy if Kamala Harris had become president. So that's point one. Point two, the tariffs that the president unveiled on April 2nd were one of the biggest shocks, one of the biggest man-made shocks to the economic system since this time 5 years ago, when the new virus that came from Wuhan caused the global economy to shut down. It's not as big, and it's not necessarily as lasting, but if you look at the impact it has had on trade, particularly also on passenger traffic. I mean, look at the passenger flights from Canada. We haven't seen a decline, and Europe, like that since 5 years ago. So I think it's worth recognizing, even although markets are in a somewhat more optimistic mood than they were the week after Liberation Day, that we're still in the midst of a dramatic shock. Brian, the average U.S. tariff rate is 10 times what it was last year. That is a huge increase in tariffs and implicitly also a tax on consumers. It's a big shock.
If I were to pull most of these really smart women in behind us here, they would probably say, well, the tariffs are a disruption, but it's the length of time that they're on that might matter more than the raw amount of the tariff itself. Would you agree with that?
I think it's also the uncertainty about where they land. And we are in the midst of a frantic negotiation to try to come up with trade deals within that 90-day limit that the president set when he paused everything on April 9th. And the truth is, nobody knows where this lands. The Japanese are negotiating. They wanted to get away from even the 10% base tariff. They've just been told no, I gather. So there's uncertainty. There's also massive uncertainty, Brian, about China, because the U.S. China trade relationship has effectively been ended. This is not just a tariff, it's an embargo. And so that embargo could last for who knows how long. Markets were telling themselves last week, somehow this all gets done. Scott Bessent waves a magic wand and much of this goes away. I am struggling to find evidence that that outcome is the base case. My expectation is that the tariffs last.
Us or China?
Well, the Chinese are probably feeling more relative pain because they're so reliant on exports, but they have a system which is essentially opinion-proof. It's a one-party state with a surveillance system that makes any kind of political opposition virtually impossible. So he doesn't have to, Xi Jinping does not need to worry about opinion polls or midterms. Donald Trump and the Republican Party has to already be worrying that this economy may not go into a recession, but it's clearly going to slow. Every economist you talk to knows the growth rate is going down to 1%, and a significant portion of economists are expecting a recession. Donald Trump may not be worried about that. He sounds very bullish in his interviews, but if I'm sitting in the House of Representatives, if I'm in the Senate as a Republican, then I have to worry about that.
Literally, Ted Cruz walked by us as you were talking. I should have pulled him into the conversation.
Yeah.
The president will say he's trying to do something about our national debt. Yes. You've written a lot about debts and deficits and the role they play in a nation's superpower status. What have you learned, and what does our debt level tell you about the future of the United States?
At the beginning of this year, Brian, I published a piece saying that Ferguson's law applies. And Ferguson's law states that if a great power is spending more on interest payments than on defense, it won't be great for very much longer. The U.S. crossed that threshold last year, and although President Trump's increasing revenue somewhat with his tariffs, that's clearly true, he's also about to pass a great big beautiful bill that not only extends the 2017 tax cuts, but it also adds some more for good measure, and he's increasing defense spending. I don't see a way in which the deficit isn't bigger in 2025 than it was in 2024, and that also means that the debt burden grows, and unless interest rates come crashing down, which they haven't yet done, that means that interest payments are going up. So that is a really major problem for a superpower, that it is in a game of chicken with another superpower.
So, let's talk interest rates, because you nailed it, as usual, Sir Neal. When the tariffs first hit and the markets collapsed, crashed, is not too strong of a word. Also, borrowing costs crashed for about a 9-day period. The 10-year yield, I think, would be like 3.5%. And I said to my wife, I said, well, I guess it's bad, but the one upside is borrowing costs and debt costs may come down. The bond market then had one of the biggest reversals, like the stock market in the history of modern finance. And now you're looking at a bond, 4.3 or whatever on the 10-year. Why isn't the bond market bringing rates down more?
So this is the single biggest thing to worry about, and what you have to think about is not
why I asked you.
Not just yields. Don't just look at the 10-year yield. Look at the dollar. So in the happy story that it's 1985 all over again when we were mere boys, and it's the Plaza Accord only it's the Mar-a-Lago Accord, the dollar goes down, but so do rates. You know, yields are going to come down, and if we're all going to live happily ever after, weak dollar, lower rates, market rips. That's the 1980s story. The problem is, as I have been pointing out to people in the administration, it could be 1971, dollar goes down, but yields don't come down because of inflation expectations, because the deficit doesn't look great. Then it's a very much less pretty picture, and that's why we have to watch both yields and the dollar. This is the critical relationship in markets today, because what we saw after Liberation Day was scary. Scary. If President Trump hadn't paused the reciprocal tariffs, I think we would have had a bond market crisis, and that could have got very ugly indeed.
Wow. I'm going to leave it there, even though we could probably go on for another half hour, because I'd love to know what that bond market crisis may look like. I hope we
go away, Brian. It may go away, but it may go away because there's a recession.
Go away for the wrong reasons. So, Sir Neal Ferguson of Ferguson's Law. Always appreciate your views. Thank you. Kelly, it's probably why you launch your show every day, looking at yields, looking at the dollar. Those are the things that matter right now.
I echo what you said. Always love hearing from Sir Ferguson, who always makes us think. Brian, thanks. Coming up, the end of an era. Warren Buffett handing over the role of Berkshire Hathaway CEO.